Resident Evil 9 includes a terrifying roster of new and old enemies to the series, pairing each of them with some disturbing lore for how they all came to be. From tragic cloning experiments gone horribly wrong, to corrupt villains who spent their entire life chasing a lie, all the way from the nightmarish mutations birthed from a mutated T-virus strain. Here is the disturbing lore of every single enemy in Resident Evil 9. Before we can delve into the main antagonists of the game, we first have to know what came before them that led to their obsession with Grace in a mysterious project known as Elpis. The children are the result of Umbrella founder Oswald E. Spencer's research into T-virus strains and how it might influence cognition, behavior, and memory. Horrific experiments involving controlled cloning of children and viral infusion were conducted, designed to test whether memory could be biologically transferred. Subjects were created using recombinant DNA, engineered as near-perfect genetic duplicates. The early trials, classified under Series 60, were failures. Even after increasing the volume of Spencer's injected plasma, successful memory transfer did not occur. Instead, subjects developed severe mental abnormalities, including behavioral instability and cognitive distortion. The human mind proved far more fragile than Spencer had anticipated. The clones that went after Chloe in 1990 were part of these Series 60 experiments. Their minds became heavily corrupted from the procedures, resulting in the researchers losing control of the situation and all being swarmed by the children and killed. A closer look at the appearance of the children reflects the horrors they endured. We can see surgical stitching across their head that came from the nightmarish memory transfer procedures. Their eyes glow with an unnatural red light, while dark veins spread across their necks and cheeks, showing physical signs of the virus coursing through their bodies. Spencer's memory transfer research on the children would eventually be stolen by the Connections once they seized the Ark lab, the same lab where they would discover Spencer's secret project known as Elpis, which they believed at the time to be a powerful mind control virus. Upon digging further into Spencer's incomplete notes, they were led to believe that the cloning experiments were tied to Elpis, and that a girl named Grace Ashcroft was the original of all the clones and the key to unlock Elpis. With the use of Spencer's memory transfer research and Grace's medical records, the Connections began work creating numerous clones in an attempt to create a genetic duplicate of Grace, which would ultimately lead to some of the most horrifying creatures seen in Resident Evil 9. Zeno was a high-ranking member of the Connections and played a big role in the creation of clones in an attempt to unlock Elpis, eventually partnering with the main antagonist of the game, Victor Gideon, to progress their research. After Victor succeeded in retrieving Grace, the supposed key to unlock Elpis, Zeno would arrive to the care center with a helicopter to transport Grace to Ark. Once there, Grace ultimately frees Elpis, and Zeno instantly injects it into himself, hoping to receive its mind control powers. But it turns out that Elpis was actually an antiviral, so he is cured of his T-virus infection instead. In the end, the truth is revealed that Victor and the Connections had been chasing a flawed pursuit the entire time. Grace was just a normal girl, and she had no connection to Emily and the other clones they had created. Then, just as Victor arrives, Zeno lashes out and expresses his anger after wasting countless time and money into a flawed pursuit. Victor, however, chooses to align himself with Spencer's final decision, and resolves to carry out what he interprets as Spencer's vision of bringing chaos to the world. Zeno would then ridicule both him and Spencer, causing Victor to reach his breaking point and terminate him. And just as quickly as that, Zeno's story comes to an end. There's still a great deal of mystery surrounding Zeno, but one thing immediately stands out, being that he bears a striking physical resemblance to Albert Wesker, one of Resident Evil's older villains. While the game never directly confirms this connection, it is heavily implied that Zeno may actually be a clone of Albert Wesker. This implication is supported by both his abilities and by a line spoken by Victor, who bluntly tells him that he was nothing but an imitation. Despite this hint, the game stops short of fully explaining Zeno's origins, leaving many questions unanswered. Throughout the game, we can see Zeno possess nearly the same physical abilities and alterations as Albert Wesker, which were originally obtained from a virus activation triggered by the prototype virus during the Spencer Mansion incident, those being super speed, fast regeneration, and alteration of eye color and shape of the pupil. As demonstrated by the black marks on his face, Zeno is infected with the Raccoon City Syndrome, an infection that originates when a latent T-virus strain adapts to the host's antibodies. Victor Gideon serves as the main antagonist of this game, and he is responsible for a good amount of enemy creations within it. His origins trace back to Umbrella, where he worked as a researcher studying the evolution of the T-virus. During his time there, Victor developed a deep loyalty to Umbrella's founder Oswald E. Spencer, and strongly believed in Spencer's vision of forced human evolution. Victor also would become particularly fascinated with Spencer's final project, known as Elpis. He believed that Elpis wasn't just another experiment, but a powerful weapon capable of shifting the military balance of the entire world. And now, driven by this belief, Victor became determined to obtain it. After Umbrella's bankruptcy in 2003, Victor quietly moved to continue his work. He purchased the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center, using it as a front for further research. From there, he also formed a partnership with Zeno and the Connections, hoping that together they could unlock the secrets of Elpis and continue advancing Spencer's T-virus research. The hospital would serve as a perfect front for Victor, allowing him to conceal his disturbing experiments within the underground facilities and restricted areas of the building. During this time, his research led to several shocking discoveries. The first was something he referred to as Raccoon City Syndrome. This was a lethal disease caused by a latent strain of the T-virus that had evolved to adapt to its host's antibodies. The condition produced a number of horrific symptoms, including intense pain, vomiting blood, and black marks spreading across the entire body. Once the illness reached its final stage, the infected host would typically die within 1 to 2 hours. This syndrome proved to be extremely fatal, with no recorded cases of survival, and despite years of intense research, Victor was never able to develop a cure. Victor would also pursue another line of research involving a modified strain of the T-virus. This variant was theorized to have the ability to control a subject's memories and will. Interestingly, individuals infected with this strain would still retain many of their pre-infection habits and personality traits. Armed with this information, Victor would begin quietly abducting patients who had no family or outside advocates, using them as test subjects for his experiments. Deep within the hospital, he would conduct brutal procedures in an attempt to perfect the mutated strain. These horrific experiments continued for decades, eventually leading Victor to work with 2 clones that had been created by the Connections and sent to his care center for testing. Then, after 2 decades, Victor finally located Grace herself, the girl he believed held the key to freeing Elpis, and once he successfully kidnapped her, Victor no longer needed the care center. Knowing that Leon Kennedy would eventually come after him, he activated Code 6, placing the entire building into a lockdown. And as part of the protocol, select members of staff were deliberately infected, triggering chaos inside the entire facility. Those infected would go on to slaughter and spread the virus to everyone inside the building, turning the hospital into a real-life nightmare. The Hooded Man was a specially trained assassin working for Victor and the Connections. At some point, he became infected with the mutated strain of the T-virus, which heightened his aggression while still allowing him to retain his pre-infection skills as a professional hitman. Once investigative journalist Alyssa Ashcroft began getting dangerously close to exposing Victor and his operations, the Hooded Man was dispatched to silence her. Through notes found throughout the game, we learn that he had been watching Alyssa and her daughter Grace for several days, carefully observing their movements and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. He eventually made his move while the two were staying at the Wrenwood Hotel. To remain hidden, he first shut off the power, plunging the building into darkness. And not long after, he finally confronted them on the first floor, killing the hotel manager right in front of their eyes. Alyssa attempted to defend herself, firing at him multiple times before managing to lock him inside a room, hoping to buy enough time for her and Grace to escape. However, it wasn't long after when the hooded man caught up to them and ultimately succeeded in assassinating Alyssa. Then, right after, the hooded man had succumbed to his gunshot wounds he had sustained during the confrontation, and as he collapsed, he knocked over a nearby lamp, which ignited a fire that quickly set the entire hotel ablaze. Norman Cole was an officer within the Wrenwood Police Department who was dispatched to the Wrenwood Hotel to secure a crime scene. The investigation involved the fifth corpse connected to a recent string of mysterious deaths that affected survivors of the Raccoon City incident across the United States. After he would secure the area, Grace Ashcroft would arrive to begin her own investigation, and Cole escorted her into the building. At some point during this, Cole was infected by Victor and eventually would confront Grace again in the hotel, but this time he appeared dazed and confused. Cole accidentally startled Grace and began turning in front of her, coughing up loose teeth as the infection rapidly took hold. And in the middle of his transformation, he attempted to attack her with a shotgun. Grace ultimately managed to escape to the second floor, but during the struggle, she was bitten on the forearm by the now zombified Cole. Despite this, Grace fought back. She grabbed a glass shard, stabbed Cole in the neck, and pushed him out of a nearby window. Following this incident, Cole was officially declared missing, prompting the Wrenwood Police Department to launch a deeper investigation into his disappearance. And as the situation would quickly escalate, DSO agent Leon and his support partner Sherry were assigned to assess the incident and uncover what had happened. The Wrenwood Zombies were a direct result of Victor Gideon infecting nearby civilians after he had kidnapped Grace. His goal was simple: create chaos in the city to distract Leon and buy himself time to escape the area. The plan ultimately worked. Victor's actions triggered a small-scale outbreak in Wrenwood, which quickly led to a mass panic as the mutated strain of the virus began spreading among local civilians and nearby construction workers. As the situation quickly spiraled out of control, Leon fought his way through the growing mob of infected, trying to push through the streets and catch up to Victor. But despite his efforts, Victor managed to slip away and disappear into the city. However, data retrieved by Sherry would eventually provide Leon with a new lead, pointing him toward the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center, where Leon would continue his search for him. The Care Center zombies were the direct result of Victor deliberately infecting the entire facility. Once he had successfully kidnapped Grace, whom he believed to be the key to Elpis, Victor no longer had any use for the hospital and issued what he called Code 6 in an attempt to distract Leon. Once Leon arrived, the building immediately went into lockdown, and select staff members and doctors were infected, quickly transforming them into zombies as part of the protocol. These infected individuals quickly began slaughtering and infecting everyone inside the facility, turning the care center into a real-life nightmare. Several notes left behind by the final survivors paint a horrifying picture of what unfolded during the outbreak. One folded note written by a staff member describes hearing distant screams echoing through the hallways, while witnessing co-workers suddenly turn on one another in violent confusion. Another entry, believed to be the final message from a different staff member, states that everyone else was already dead and that she was the last survivor left alive. She attempted to escape but failed, and in her final words, she recounts watching her co-workers being eaten alive, the horrifying images replaying in her mind like an endless loop that she could not escape. In the end, everyone inside the facility met the same fate: staff, doctors, patients, and countless others. Some zombies were different from others, arming themselves with unique weapons and gaining enhanced abilities. However, they all shared one disturbing trait. They retained fragments of their pre-infection habits and routines, but now they carried them out in a far more violent and aggressive way. One example is a maid who continues her cleaning duties by aggressively scrubbing the bathroom mirrors while repeatedly smashing her head into them. The result left glass shards embedded throughout her entire face. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the chef continues preparing food, methodically chopping fresh meat with intense aggression, eventually leaving his entire workstation covered in blood splattered across the walls. Because of his large physical build, he functions as a brute-type enemy, relentlessly pursuing anyone who enters his area. Among the zombie staff, one particular individual has developed an extreme sensitivity to light. He constantly clings to the nearby light switches, and if someone attempts to turn on the lights, he immediately panics and rushes to shut them off. Elsewhere, the infected doctors behave in equally unsettling ways. Some can be heard nervously repeating medical procedures or discussing the conditions of former patients in a very unsettling way.
It's time to rotate the pelvis.
Meanwhile, a zombie surgeon becomes far more aggressive than others, now wielding a massive butcher knife and attempting to carve up anyone who crosses his path. The zombie singers are among the more interesting enemies found within the Rhodes Hill Care Center. There are two of them in total, named Selena and Eileen, and through medical records discovered in the facility, we learned that both women were once patients at the care center who were receiving treatment for histrionic personality disorder, a mental health condition characterized by excessive emotionality and a constant need for attention. Eileen in particular underwent a disturbing procedure in which certain cranial nerves were surgically removed. The operation resulted in a severe form of histrionic personality disorder that could best be described as something resembling main character syndrome. Because of their symptoms, both Selena and Eileen were known to wander the halls of the care center while loudly singing, often drawing attention to themselves. Then, during the Rhodes Hill incident, both women were attacked and infected during the outbreak, but even after turning, they continued their strange behavior, roaming the hallways while singing and screaming. However, the infection now amplified their aggression and gave them a dangerous new ability. The two singers can now weaponize their voices, unleashing ear-piercing shrieks capable of disorienting anyone nearby for a short period of time. Blister heads are created when corpses infected with the mutated T-virus strain reanimate after death, returning far more aggressive and physically stronger than they were before. Compared to standard infected, they are also much more resilient, capable of withstanding significantly more damage. Once the mutation occurs, a large tumorous growth begins to form on the head due to abnormal red blood cell development, and as the transformation progresses, the host develops several disturbing features, including rows of newly formed teeth and an elongated tongue. The mutation eventually causes the skin of the head to peel back, exposing the host's infected brain. Once a blister head encounters an intruder, it typically attacks by widely flailing its arms in a swatting motion as it aggressively charges its target. In order to fully eliminate one of these creatures, the head must be completely removed. Or another method of preventing their transformation is by injecting hemolytic poison into the corpse before the mutation can even occur. Once inside the body, the poison destroys the infected blood cells, stopping the secondary mutation from taking place. Blister heads serve as a clear callback to the Crimson Heads from the original Resident Evil, sharing similar reanimation mechanics and heightened aggression. However, their grotesque mutations and behavior help them stand apart from typical zombies, giving them their own distinct identity. The Blister Borne is a rare secondary stage of the blister head mutation. In some cases, once the initial tumor forms on the host's head, the mutation continues to escalate, transforming the infected into a far more grotesque and dangerous creature. During this advanced stage, the host's body expands into a large, bulky form covered in grotesque sores. The mutation also produces multiple tumorous organs across the body that pulse like a heartbeat. Then, as the transformation begins to worsen, additional teeth begin to grow, eventually spreading all throughout its mouth. Although slower than typical blister heads, these creatures are just as dangerous, if not more so. One of their most lethal abilities is the capacity to vomit highly acidic blood, which can deal massive damage to anyone caught in its path. In addition, if one of the creature's tumorous organs burst, it releases toxic fluids that can trigger double mutation in nearby infected, rapidly escalating the threat level in the surrounding area. Because of their immense durability and dangerous abilities, Blister Borne enemies function as mini-boss encounters within the game, and is not a threat that should be taken lightly. The Chunk twins were once ordinary patients at the care center who had been admitted for severe eating disorders. Their names were Thomas and Timothy, and during their stay, both brothers underwent surgical procedures designed to suppress the brain's satiety center, the region responsible for triggering the feeling of fullness and signaling the body to stop eating. Once this part of the brain was disrupted, the results were immediate and extreme, causing both patients to experience rapid weight gain and a dramatically increased appetite. Thomas specifically began consuming anything he could get his hands on, including medical equipment such as infusion pumps and pacemakers. Timothy's behavior, however, became even more disturbing. His eating habits took a darker turn as he developed cannibalistic tendencies and an intense fixation on human flesh. Whenever the doctors attempted to restrict their food intake, both twins would become violently agitated. Then, when Victor Gideon activated Code 6 at the care center, the Chunk twins were tragically forced into the chaos, and at some point became infected with the mutated T-virus strain. Eventually, as their infection progressed, their bodies continued to mutate. Their skin turned a grotesque pale color, and both developed what appeared to be a tumorous growth on the back of the head. With the facility in lockdown and the infection quickly spreading, the Chunk twins began rampaging through the building, devouring anyone and anything they encountered to satisfy their overwhelming hunger. Eventually, Leon crosses paths with one of the twins, witnessing a horrifying scene as the creature feasts on a member of the staff. Even after finishing its meal, the monster is still unsatisfied and turns its attention toward Leon, triggering an intense boss battle. However, in the end, Leon manages to defeat the creature once and for all. The other twin, however, remains active within the facility. It relentlessly pursues Grace throughout the hallways of the care center, attempting to devour her as she desperately searches for a way to escape the building. Emily was the result of the Connection's attempts to create clones that would be a genetic duplicate of Grace in order to unlock the secrets of Elpis. At some point, she and another clone named Marie were transported to the Rhodes Hill Care Center, where they were subjected to gruesome experiments involving the mutated T-virus strain. Emily was designated Subject 171, and like the other experimental subjects, she was kept under strict containment in restricted areas of the facility. During one of the procedures performed on her, Emily developed severe cataracts, which ultimately caused her to lose eyesight. To keep her mentally stimulated during long periods of isolation, members of the hospital staff taught her Braille, allowing her to read through touch despite her blindness. Then, eventually, as her experimentation continued, Emily was assigned a new nurse. However, the nurse quickly became unsettled by Emily's complete lack of emotion during their interactions. Then, during a later visit, the facility's security manager questioned Emily about blood, only to discover that she appeared to be entirely unfamiliar with the concept. Sometime later, during the lockdown of the care center, Grace eventually discovered Emily, and the two began searching for a way to escape the facility together. Along the way, they encountered many horrifying creatures, including one known as the Girl, which we will go over next. Then, near the end of their escape attempt, Emily's body eventually succumbed to the toxic effects of the mutated T-virus strain, and unable to withstand the infection any longer, she tragically mutated into a grotesque and unrecognizable creature. Her body became covered in large tumorous growths, and her face transformed into something far removed from anything human. Her mouth split open vertically, forming a massive tooth-lined maw surrounded by small sunken eyes, giving her a horrifying and unnatural appearance. Shortly after this transformation, Leon was forced to open fire on the creature, knocking Emily to the ground. However, unknown to Grace, every shot Leon fired narrowly avoided Emily's vital organs. Sometime later, after Grace and Leon successfully obtained the antiviral agent known as Elpis, ambulance crews were able to recover Emily's body, where she was then treated with Elpis, which successfully reversed the mutation. The treatment also restored her eyesight, curing the blindness caused by the earlier experiments. Following her recovery, Emily was taken in by Grace and raised as her adopted daughter. Marie was another clone created by the Connections, much like Emily, who was taken to the Rhodes Hill Care Center to undergo further experimentation with the mutated T-virus strain. And sadly, her story is just as dark. During her time at the facility, Marie was restrained and subjected to a brutal experimental procedure involving the mutated T-virus. Records note that small blood samples from 115 infected individuals were extracted and forcibly injected into her body. At first, the results appeared promising. Marie demonstrated abnormal physical strength and heightened resilience, suggesting that the experiment might have been successful. However, she ultimately failed to meet the intended objective, and her body soon began succumbing to the toxicity of the mutated strain. Because of this, Marie was returned to her glass containment chamber and officially scheduled for disposal. But before the procedure could ever be carried out, Marie would use her newly enhanced strength to dig a wall in her containment cell, escaping into the basement of the facility. It was there that the virus fully overtook her system, triggering a violent and uncontrollable mutation that transformed her into a grotesque monster. The creature now lurched forward on long skeletal limbs resembling hoofs, moving with an unnatural and disturbing gait. When she screamed, rows of rotting teeth could be seen inside a massive, distorted jaw. Her swollen eyes bulged from her decayed skull, while long strands of her white hair clung to her pale, diseased skin. As she hid beneath the facility, Marie's mutation continued to progress. She developed extreme aggression and cannibalistic tendencies, attacking anyone she encountered. But despite her monstrous form, fragments of her original personality and memories remained intact, being a side effect of the mutated T-virus strain. Through notes found in the underground areas, we learned that Marie developed an extreme sensitivity to light, and once the staff had realized that she fled into the basement, they attempted to corner her by installing high-intensity ultraviolet lamps throughout the area. However, due to the immense strength she gained from the virus, every attempt to contain or eliminate her had failed, and the staff members sent to deal with her were completely slaughtered. Later, at some point after Victor initiated the hospital lockdown, Marie resurfaced from the basement and began roaming the halls of the care center, devouring anyone she crossed paths with. She was able to move throughout the building by tearing holes through ceilings and floors, allowing her to travel between different sections of the facility. Later, during Grace's time inside the care center, Marie relentlessly stalked and pursued her throughout the building. Then, at one point, just as Grace and Emily were close to escaping, Marie intercepted them and grabbed Emily. However, despite her violent mutation, Marie retained enough emotional memory to recognize her friend. So instead of killing her, Marie spared Emily's life and carried her to an underground prison cell filled with dolls. Grace would later unlock the cell and free Emily, and the two continued their escape from the facility. Marie would return one final time for a last confrontation as Grace worked to restore power and open the hatch above. After holding off the creature once again and successfully restoring electricity to the facility, Grace managed to open the hatch, allowing light to flood into the area. And because of Marie's extreme sensitivity to light, the exposure proved fatal. The intense illumination caused her body to completely dissolve, finally bringing an end to her tragic story. The Raccoon City zombies, like others, are humans who have become infected further from the mutated T-virus strain. After the missile strike on the town, these creatures became buried in the rubble, with the virus remaining in their body and keeping them from decaying rapidly. By the time Leon arrived decades later, they emerged from the ground and attacked. This mutated T-virus allowed the zombies throughout the town to retain their pre-infection habits. Construction workers could be seen wielding various tools, with a few in particular being more aggressive than the rest and arming themselves with chainsaws, ready to carve up any foe in their way. Meanwhile, cops at the RPD would also continue their past endeavors. The BSAA zombies in particular have a much sinister story. These troops were sent in by the US government with the objective of retrieving Elpis from the Ark lab, establishing a small operational camp near the facility before attempting to move in. However, every time they attempted to advance towards the facility, the missions ended in disaster. The squads repeatedly encounter nearby infected, and many of the soldiers were brutally killed during these operations. One squad in particular met a horrifying fate when they encountered Zeno. Using his powers, he obliterated the entire team, blowing each soldier apart with devastating force. Eventually, many of these troops succumbed to the effects of the mutated T-virus strain spreading through the area, and by the time Leon had arrived, he would encounter dozens of these zombified soldiers that could still handle firearms and other weapons, making them far more dangerous than ordinary zombies. The Titan Spinner is a massive experimental tarantula that roams the ruins of Raccoon City. While the game never directly explains how this monster was created, an interesting environmental detail inside the Ark lab may provide a clue. Near the entrance of the facility, there is a large warehouse area covered in thick webs, stretching across the walls and surrounding numerous cargo crates. This strongly suggests that the creature may have originally been held in containment within the lab, and at some point, it likely broke free and escaped through the elevator shaft, eventually making its way into the ruins of Raccoon City where it now roams freely. Although there are no documents within the Ark lab that directly explain its creation, it's very possible that the Titan Spinner was another bioweapon experiment conducted by the Connections, using Umbrella's research data. More specifically, the creature may have been an attempt to further enhance Umbrella's web spinner bioweapon line, particularly the iconic Black Tiger, a web spinner that had mutated further due to prolonged exposure to the T-virus. This is further supported by some other similarities between the two. The names web spinner and Titan Spinner are strikingly similar, and the two creatures share a nearly identical appearance. During Leon's encounter with the Titan Spinner, it is also revealed that the creature acts as a mother to a cluster of smaller infant spiders, which is another notable trait shared with the Black Tiger. The Garmr is a canine, mass-produced bioorganic weapon created by the Connections within the Ark facility, and was sold for $30 million apiece. They were developed through further experimentation on Umbrella's Cerberus bioweapon, which those were created by injecting early strains of the T-virus into Dobermans. Despite being based on the Cerberus, the Garmr shows very little physical resemblance to its predecessor. Its fur and tail are noticeably longer, its coat appears a single color, and its facial features are far more exaggerated. However, it does retain a few recognizable traits from the original model, including exposed ribs, cropped ears, and the instinct to hunt in coordinated packs. The Garmr has also been significantly enlarged, and its combat capabilities have been greatly enhanced. One of its most dangerous upgrades is its ability to track and pursue targets at extremely high speeds of up to 60 miles per hour. This is demonstrated during the motorcycle chase between Leon and Victor, where numerous Garmr units are unleashed in an attempt to stop Leon. And even at high speeds, the creatures have no difficulty catching up to him and keeping pace. They also display impressive jumping ability and durability as they continue pursuing Leon throughout skyscrapers and across large gaps, making them one of the most relentless bioweapons encountered in the game. The Tyrant T501 is a modified variant of Umbrella's well-known Tyrant series, a line of mass-produced human-based bioorganic weapons that are now being enhanced by the Connections. These upgraded Tyrants are sold for $120 million each, making them some of the most expensive bioweapons ever produced. The T501 was designed to carry out simple but deadly commands, such as tracking down and eliminating specific targets. Like other Tyrants in the series, it also comes equipped with a long coat, allowing it to maintain a rough human disguise when deployed. As with most Tyrant models, the T-501 has a small device implanted in its head known as a power limiter. This device exists to suppress further mutation and keep the creature stable. However, if the Tyrant suffers serious physical damage, the limiter will automatically deactivate, triggering a secondary mutation into its Super Tyrant form. Once in this state, the creature becomes far more stronger and aggressive, while also developing massive razor-sharp claws. The one downside of this mutation is the now exposed organ acting as a weak spot to the creature. In RE9, one of these T-501 Tyrants is deployed by the Connections to act as a bodyguard for Zeno within the ruins of the Raccoon Police Department. Once Leon attempts to intervene, the Tyrant appears and begins relentlessly pursuing him throughout the building, forcing Leon to evade the creature as it hunts him down. The chase eventually leads to a final confrontation outside the building, and during the fight, Leon fires at a missile being carried by the Tyrant, triggering an explosion that deactivates the power limiter and causes the Tyrant to mutate into its Super Tyrant form. This results in a fierce and intense battle, but after dealing enough damage, Leon ultimately emerges victorious and defeats the creature. Plant 43 was a prototype bioweapon developed from a viral plant infection that was discovered in the Ark Mountains and the ruins of Raccoon City, both of which had been originated from T-virus mutations. Through further experimentation with Umbrella's plant-based bioweapons research, the Connections were able to create a monstrous organism composed of tangled black roots and vine-like tendrils. At the center of the creature sits a large star-shaped flytrap, lined with razor-sharp thorns along its edges. During testing, the creature proved to be an extremely powerful bioweapon, which ultimately led to Plant 43 being valued at $100 million. But then, at some point during the Connections' continued development of bioweapons, an incident occurred while transporting the experimental Plant 43, resulting in a major infestation near the service entrance of the Ark facility. Once released, the creature's roots spread rapidly throughout the surrounding area, and by the time Leon arrived, the infestation had already expanded significantly, and he was forced to fight off the plant's tendrils miles away from the facility itself. Then, when Leon finally confronts the core of the organism, he is drawn into an intense battle as the creature attacks using its massive tendrils and jagged flytrap-like teeth. But in the end, Leon manages to defeat the bioweapon by shooting nearby gas cans, triggering an explosion that engulfs the entire plant in flames and destroys it. The Liquor Beta 2 is an improved version of the Liquor Beta, developed by the Connections using research data left behind by Umbrella and Tricell. Originally, the liquor was not something that scientists had intentionally created. It was a random secondary mutation that occasionally occurred within a T-virus infected zombie. For years, researchers were unable to determine what specific factors triggered this transformation. However, after extensive experimentation, the Connections were finally able to identify the conditions, allowing them to replicate the process and begin mass producing the creature. Beyond simply recreating the liquor, the organization also introduced several enhancements, one of the most notable being an increase in the creature's climbing ability. Because of these improvements and its effectiveness in combat, each Liquor Beta 2 unit was valued at $14 million. Like earlier Liquor models, the Liquor Beta 2 is completely blind. Instead, it relies on its extremely heightened sense of hearing, enabling it to locate the source of loud sounds almost instantly. Physically, the creature is entirely devoid of skin, leaving its body composed of exposed muscle tissue and tendons. Because of this, the creature has an intense weakness to sulfuric acid. The creature also possesses razor-sharp claws and a long, powerful tongue, which it uses to lash out and attack prey from a distance. All of these traits combine to make the Liquor Beta 2 a highly dangerous bioweapon, one that should never be underestimated. The Ark Zombies were created when nearby zombies in Raccoon City were infected with the experimental mutated T-virus strain. This process allowed the organization to collect a large amount of empirical data, which they used to further study and evolve the T-virus. As a result of the mutation, these zombies developed grotesque grayish skin covered entirely in sores, giving them a noticeably more disturbing appearance than other infected. When Leon and Grace eventually infiltrate the Ark lab, they encounter many of these creatures throughout the facility, where some of them would arm themselves with nearby objects, using glass shards and metal pipes. The elite guards were part of a private paramilitary force employed by the Connections that would be deployed to eliminate Leon. Each of them are suited with tactical gear and arm themselves with various weapons, including hatchets, pistols, SMGs, and riot shields. Ultimately, all the troops that were dispatched stood no chance against Leon and were quickly taken out one by one. The commander was a high-ranking member of the private paramilitary force employed by the Connections, and he was present at the Ark lab when Leon was infiltrating it in order to locate Grace. He was presumably responsible for ordering the Special Forces soldiers to hunt down Leon, but after they were unable to neutralize him, the commander took it upon himself to finish the job. The two engaged in a one-on-one combat with hatchets, eventually being thrown out of nearby glass into a lower level to continue the fight. But before Leon could fully recover, the commander was up and ready to continue, initially reaching for his handgun to finish the job, but decides against it. During the fight, the commander would try numerous tactics, throwing flash grenades, gunfire with his SMG, chopping a nearby tank that released fog to conceal his presence, and even attempting to snap Leon's neck outright. But in the end, Leon was able to overcome it all and slice the commander's neck. However, while presumably killed at first, his body vanishes shortly after, leaving his further fate unknown. Click this video here for some more Resident Evil lore. Thank you guys so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.